So here's what it looks like in the life of Jesus. So chapters 8 and 9 are the lived out Sermon on the Mount. And it's all the action chapters, the miracles that are taking place, and you realize he's handpicked. I think that the miracles Jesus did are so numerous that we would be astounded if we knew the number of miracles he actually did. I'm not talking 30 or 40. I'm not talking 100. I'm not talking a couple hundred miracles. I'm not talking 300 or 400 miracles. I'm talking, I think we would be absolutely blown away if we knew the amount of miracles that actually spilled through the man. It was phenomenal. And he just handpicked, Matthew just handpicked some of these. Now, at the end of chapter 9, you move into this scene where he is coming to, he's been doing all the miracles, he's been doing all the preaching, the disciples have been followers. They've been the bouncers, they've been the ushers, but that's about the most they've done. They've delivered the food and done some of the service, but they haven't been actively involved in aggressive ministry of miracles, preaching, that sort of thing up to this point. Now all of that's going to shift. Jesus says, hey, we're going to make a major shift here. We're going to go from I'm doing it all to, hey, I'm going to duplicate, in fact, I don't know what the word is, but make myself 12 more times. What would that be? Oh, you're as dumb as I am. Okay, so anyhow, I'm going to duplicate myself 12 times. And now there's 13 of us. And I'm sending you out. And the motivation for this is at the end of verse 9, at the end of chapter 9, at the end of chapter 9, where he sees the multitude, he's moved with compassion in verse 36. And then in verse 37, he turns to his disciples and says, the harvest is truly plentiful, the laborers are few. This has really gripped him inwardly. And he says, come on, let's have a prayer that the Lord will send forth laborers into the harvest field. And of course, when you pray, the consistent thing about prayer is that anytime you are really burdened and praying, he will make you the head of the committee to do something about it. So he jumps up in the middle of their prayer meeting and says, oh, your prayers are answered, I'm sending you. So the 12, and it's very significant in chapter 10, verse 1, that he called his 12 disciples. Look at the wordage of this. He called his 12 disciples to him, gave them power over unclean spirits to cast them out, to heal all kinds of sickness and all kinds of diseases. Now the names of the 12 apostles. So in verse 1, they're disciples. In verse 2, they are apostles. They've gone from disciples to apostles. They've gone from followers to ones who have been sent. That's the language. They've followed him around, been studying his techniques, been doing on-the-job training. Now he has taken what's inside of him and transferred it to them. Now all of chapter 10 is an instructional chapter. He's going to instruct them on ministry. How to minister, what ministry is all about. He's going to define ministry. He's giving them major concepts that are going to direct them in all the miracles they're going to do, all their interactions with the people they're going to be confronted with. He is going to give them major instruction on the conceptual view that they are to have, the attitude they are to maintain, how they are to approach this whole thing. So anytime you want to say, well, what's ministry all about? Come to chapter 10. It's all laid out for you here. And it's a phenomenal chapter. Now, in chapter 10, we're dividing it into 3 sections. The first one is the cause of ministry. And I wish I had some nice little sheets to give to you. But I don't. Which is chapter 10, verse 1 through 15. The cause of ministry. And the cause of ministry is very specific. The cause of ministry is he finally found some guys who had some talent. He finally, after waiting all of this time, found some guys who had PhDs in church growth. He finally found some guys who qualified and could form a quartet and wow the crowd. He finally found a bunch of guys who were type A personalities. He found them down at the car lot. And you know that none of that is true. He finally found some guys who would follow. Well, how do you know that? Because they did. And he didn't do this. He said, I'll give you this if you'll follow. No, that wasn't in the picture. They've been following all this time. And he's been watching them. Hey, I'm watching you. You are an intern and I'm watching you. And how you respond at the meal table and how you respond determines, see, that's what he's been doing all this time. And he's been watching them. And finally he's convinced, I've got on my hands some guys who are dead serious about this. And I can trust them with this. And he took them aside and he reached down inside of himself and he grabbed a hold of something. This is a preliminary to Pentecost. He reached down inside of himself, grabbed a hold of some of what he had within him, and transferred it to them. He did not get guys, this is so significant, he did not choose guys who were qualified to minister. He chose some guys that he could qualify. God is not looking for talent. He's looking for response. He's not looking for abilities. Now, that is totally opposite to everything we think of in terms of ministry. We're looking for the guys who got the personality, who can pull it off, who have got the training, who. He is looking for anybody, any place that he can fill and create talent through. Now, after they've been ministering for some time, you look at Peter, you look at these guys and say, wow, they're phenomenal. I mean, Peter is preaching on Pentecost Day, and wow, and even the leaders of Israel in the book of Acts are looking at the disciples saying, what? They're uneducated. How? What? These guys, man. So they're impressed. But don't forget, when you look at them at that point, you shouldn't be impressed with them because it's never been them. That all started back here when he reached inside of himself and transferred something of himself to them. So the reason they are impressive is, and they go overboard in the scriptures to convince you of this, the reason they're impressive is because he has created this in and through them. That's what's going on here. So that's really, really important. So he's not looking for people with talent. He's not looking for people with ability. He's looking for anybody, any place, who will just be responsive that he can do something through. So here are 12 guys that he's going to send out. And the cause of the ministry then is what he is doing within them. And then he gives them this cause of ministry, a key, absolute, down-to-it, fundamental, biblical principle that is just, whoa, it is just overwhelming. It's at the end of verse 8, as he goes through all of this instruction, he says, freely you have received, freely give. Well, how long am I to minister? Freely you received, freely give. How much should I pour into ministry? Freely you've received, freely you. Everything you've received, you should give. Well, how much money should I invest in ministry? Everything you receive, you are to invest. Well, how much love should I spill out? All the love you receive, you are to spill out. How often should I forgive people in ministry? All the forgiveness you've received, you are to dump out. How much grace should, all the grace you've ever received, you are to give out. If you keep it, it is worse than manna. It stinks. So the whole concept of cause of ministry is, I'm going to take what's inside of me, transfer it to you, and what are you to do with it? Every single thing I've given you. Well, what do you have that he hasn't given to you? You are to pour out in ministry. How much time should all the time you've ever received, pour it into ministry? How much thought, all the ability of thinking you've got, pour it into ministry. How much energy, every single ounce of energy you've ever received, pour it into ministry. Fundamental principle. And if you won't do that, you don't qualify. Go sit in the pew, go follow around, do something else. Because you don't qualify. That's the cause of ministry, the indwelling. So he goes really strong on this. Now in verse 16, you come to another section. We're calling it the consideration of ministry. And I'm trying to be like Jeremiah with the seas. It's been the dream of my life to be like Jeremiah. And I'm coming close. Through 33. This section is the consideration of ministry. Now, the last section goes from verse 34, and we're calling it the consequence of ministry, which is 10:34 to the end of the chapter, which is just a overwhelming, man, it changed my life, overwhelming section of Scripture, consequence of ministry. I want to land with you for today. We've got 3 opportunities. I want to land with you today on in this consideration of ministry and look at verse 16 through 33. In this section, which is this section right here, the consideration of ministry, he begins with the picture of ministry, which is verse 16. And we want to talk about a little bit about that today. That's actually 16a. In the rest of 16, he talks about the practice. How does this spill out? Of ministry. Verse 16b. As you move into verse 17 and 18, he talks about the persecution. He literally spells that out, of ministry, which is verse 17 through 18. The persecution of ministry. But he doesn't leave them hanging. For he then, after 2 verses of persecution of ministry, he gives them the provision of ministry, which will take them through the persecution, which is verse 19 and 20. The minute he gets done providing this provision, he immediately moves them, because this issue is with him. And he talks to them strongly again and warns them about the persecution, which is verse 21 and 22. So he's highlighted persecution twice, and in between he put the provision. So he gave them persecution, the emphasis of persecution, and then said it's going to be okay, and gave them the provision of how to handle it. Then came right back and gave them the persecution idea again, and turned right around one more time and gave them the provision of ministry. So he never leaves you hanging, which is really significant and beautiful. And then he gives you the portrait, or the portrait. He paints this wonderful of ministry, which is verse 24 through 33. So there's kind of the breakdown of the whole thing. let's talk about these two, the picture of ministry. Now, as you get into the setting in your mind, you've watched Jesus, you've been around the miracles, he's been feeding the 5,000, and there's been free food and miracles. I mean, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of miracles. I mean, people are constantly coming up to Jesus, and they're constantly thanking him. The crowds have built. There's 5,000 men besides women and children. And that has to be a crowd of like 20,000 people just hounding him. His popularity and fame is just out off the charts. Everybody's talking about him. It is so great. It's just mind-boggling. And you're right in the middle of all of this. And Jesus is a star. His name is on the billboards. They're talking about him on the Today program. Orville Winfrey had him. This is big. This is really big. His fame is there's just no way to overstate how significant this is and how successful his ministry is. And you're watching all of this. Now he comes to you and says, hey, I've carried the load on this, and it's getting too big for me to handle. I want to shift some of it to you. Takes the power he's got inside, transfers it to his disciples. They now are apostles and are being sent out. They're no longer interns. They're full-fledged ministers. We've ordained them. They're headed out. Wow, this is going to be great. They're going to do miracles. They're duplicating and what a picture. I mean, can you see Jesus with his 5,000 men besides women and children? And hey, here I am. I've got my 5,000 men besides women and children. And there's 11 others of us who've got 5,000 men besides women and children. And it's just, this thing is spreading. And we're all linked. And we're just, hey, they're naming, they're arguing about us. And everybody wants, and the newspapers and reporters. And, oh. Now, what kind of picture what kind of image would you have of that ministry in your mind? It's the picture of the top athlete telling how to be successful with Jesus. It's the picture of the beauty queen being beautiful for Jesus' sake. It's the top businessman who's made $1 million, man. He's a billionaire now. He's a billionaire telling you how it all came about because, see, this is stardom stuff, isn't it? This is big time. It's the picture of a successful educator who's learned truths and who's good in communication and got a church that runs 10,000. See, that's the imagery that you get of all of this. So when Jesus comes to paint a picture of what ministry is like, you just kind of get ready and say, oh, what am I going to become? Shorten my nose, make it look better. Oh, this is going to be good. You expect that. And when he comes to paint the picture of ministry, it's verse 16. Behold, I send you as sheep. They are the dumbest, most dependent, helpless, stupid, defenseless animals that exist. And you immediately say, not interested. See, if you want me to be the warrior for Christ, I'm in, man. Oh. By the way, this fight that's taking place between Jeremiah and Billy will be held in the parking lot one afternoon, and I'm taking wagers. It'll all, of course, go towards the project for this week. But I just wanted to tell you that. This picture see, is warrior stuff. This picture you would think would be, again, beauty queen stuff, top athlete, successful businessman, got it all together kind of guy. And he pictures us. Who on earth in their right mind would want to be a sheep? Don't forget. Don't let this get out of your mind. Don't forget, and I'm not asking you to turn to this. Let me read this to you. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we are healed. He was oppressed, and he was afflicted. He opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Redeeming a world, I'm interested in building a big church of nice people like me. Picture of ministry. Don't you think that's interesting? God has called me to preach. What are you going to look like? A dumb, helpless sheep. God has called me to youth ministry. Whoa, what's that going to mean? Muscle Beach. Oh. What's it going to mean? A dumb, helpless sheep. This is repulsive, isn't it? What do you want to do with that? Isn't it significant that Jesus, the prophetic symbol, nobody can disagree with this, the prophetic symbol of Jesus is the Lamb. Even in eternity, you know what's hanging around the throne? The Lamb. As it had been slain, a lamb with its throat slit. Any volunteers? That's really interesting. Well, why is it that way? Because that's the only way to redeem a world. How do you conquer hate? There's a hateful situation. People are at each other's throat. Hateful words are being spoken. Cutting, deep, hateful things are being said. There's a spirit of hate that's being shared. How do you go in and change that situation? Well, you go in and yell louder, hater words than anybody else. That only creates more hate. I hate them, they hate me. How do you conquer that situation? You take a shotgun and blow their stinking head off. Then you don't have to worry about them. Which creates more hate. Think about it. I'm having problems with my parents. They don't understand me. How do you handle that? Manipulate them. Do the opposite of everything they tell you to do. Get back at them every way you can. And what do? You create more of the same. But what would happen if two people are hating each other, hateful words? What would happen if you walked into that scene and laughed? Well, you say it might not change anything. May not. But more hate isn't going to change anything. It's going to accelerate. So the only chance you've got of changing your situation in hate and bitterness is to love. See, who's going to risk loving? I'm not talking about anybody's situation. I'm not even giving anybody advice. I'm just going to tell you a story. You do with it whatever you want to do. Apply it any way you want to apply it. Because what do I know? But there was a guy when I was growing up. He was the first TV evangelist. Anybody know his name? Had a 15-minute every Sunday broadcast on black and white. We had to go to our neighbors to watch it because we didn't have electricity. And we had one of those houses out back. You don't know his name. His name was Ford Philpott. His program was called The Story. 15-minute broadcast. He would tell this story. He was an alcoholic. Every Saturday night he was out boozing it. Drunk all weekend. Friday night, Saturday night, Sunday, alcohol. It would come Saturday night, wee hours of the morning. Bar would be closing up. Bartenders kicking everybody out. So all these guys soused, standing out in front of the bar in a circle as he would tell the story. And he'd say one by one they'd go around. And each one of them say, "Oh, brother, I hate to go home. I hate to go home. I hate to go home. My wife, she'll have the front door locked. My pajamas will be on the front porch. She kicks me out of the house. She'll be yelling at me." They'll each have their own story. We'll be telling. Finally, they'd come around to him, and he'd say, "Oh, I hate to go home. I'll put one foot on the front porch, My wife will open up the front door. She'll be looking her loveliest. She'll be smelling with her perfume. She'll say, Ford, I've just been praying God would keep you safe. Come on in here. Get yourself in here. I got your bath water poured. I got your slippers laid out. Come on, Ford, I got your soft chair all ready. I've got something for you to eat. The coffee's ready. Come on in here, Ford. I just been waiting for you to come home. And he said, that woman broke me down the middle. Who has ever treated me like that? I wasn't an alcoholic, but who ever treated me? Who didn't put their finger in my face and say, when I yelled at them, who didn't yell back at me? It was Jesus. He won my heart. He won my heart. When I made all kinds of blunders, who is it that didn't criticize? Only wrapped his arm around me and said, let me help you. Who is it that lived with my stupidity and the dumb things I did day after day after day and just kept helping me to grow? It's the one who redeemed me. Because that's the only redemption there is, people. A world is not redeemed because they're scared they're going to hell. That doesn't redeem anybody. You can't find it any place in the Scriptures where that's true. In fact, Paul tells us it's the goodness of God that brings us to repentance. It's not the meanness of God. It's not the I'll send you to hell kind of God that brings men to repentance. It's the goodness of, if the cross doesn't crack you down the middle, you won't be cracked. And can you see a Jesus who just right and left, everybody they brought to him, he just healed them. And now he grabs a hold of 12 guys and says, come on, guys, I want you to get into this. I want you to be a sheep. Well, what are we going to get? That? No. Well, how much will? No. Well, who should we and who shouldn't we heal? No. Come on, I want you to just, I want what I've got inside of me, I'm putting in you. And you're going to go out and be this sheep, this lamb. Whoops, got your throat slit, didn't you? Oh, good. Woo! For the joy that was set before him, went to the cross. What do you want to do with it? Oh, it's all over the Scriptures. There was a pagan world, this pagan world. Oh, this pagan world. You know what their idea was? Their principle was, do to others before they do to you. Figure out what they're going to do and nail them before they nail you. And don't ever forgive them. That's a pagan world. Because everybody's looking to get the jump on you, and they never forgive you. Never. Peter came along and said, hey, here's a Jewish world, a pagan world. Hey, do to them before they do to you, and don't ever forgive them. Here's a Jewish world, an isolated island in the middle of paganism, an isolated island that believes in God Jehovah. And you know what their idea was? Eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Hey, don't do to them before they do to you, but when they do it to you, do exactly to them what they did to you. They knock out a tooth, you knock out a tooth. They poke out an eye, you poke out an eye. And don't forgive them. Pagan world, do to them before they do to you, and don't ever forgive them. Jewish world, do to them what they do to you, when they do it to you, and don't ever forgive them. Peter, he's running for number one spot in the kingdom. He comes and says, how about this, Jesus? 7 times 7. Forgive them 7 times 7. And then nail him. Which means you got to have a lot of black books. Little black books. Probably computer now. But little black books. Where you have a guy's name and whoop, there's once. Whoop, you got to keep track of this stuff. Because after 7 times, I'm going to jump down your throat. You're going to be done. Whoop, one more time. I dare you. I dare you. I dare you. One more time. Pagan world, do to them before they do to you, and don't ever forgive them. Jewish world, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, do to them what they do to you, when they do it to you, and don't ever forgive them. Peter, 7 times 7, and then nail those dirty, no good. Jesus said, how about 70 times 7. Man, that would take a big black book. 70 times 7. That's 490. Can you imagine keeping track 490 times? It'd be grueling. It's an Old Testament phrase that says infinity. 70 times 7 was infinity. In other words, how many times should I let them nail me before I forgive them? And I keep forgiving them. How many times should I let them nail me? And then say, that's enough. Not 70 times 7. Infinity. In other words, always forgive. In other words, I'm to live in a state of total, absolute forgiving. Well, they haven't done anything to you yet. Doesn't matter, I forgive you. It's already decided, you're forgiven. It's already decided. Doesn't matter what you do, what you say, how often you say it. I'm forgiving you. I'm going to live in that attitude. Why? It's redemptive. It's the only chance you got to win your mom and dad. It's the only chance we got with this community. It's a sheep who says, come on, slit my throat. Now, as if that isn't bad enough, he says, behold, the picture is, the complete picture is, that's only half the picture. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. This is not, I know the address of the wolves. And you'd be well to avoid that. This is not, I know where they hang out. Don't go down there. This is, I know where they hang out, and I'm sending you down there. And can you see these wolves? Oh, they're drooling at the mouth. Why? Lamb chops are here. Oh. And I am, what kind of good shepherd is this? Who doesn't protect his sheep but sends them in the midst of a bunch of wolves. And there hadn't been anybody who's ever been in ministry who said, God, why? Here I am working like a dog for you, and look what happened. Here I am pouring my life out for the church, and they voted me out. Here I am giving my life away to redeem a community, and look, good night, look what they're nailing me. All I get is criticism. You're a sheep. Come on. I would wager you $100. My wife's got the money. That you will never hear this in college. And they won't teach this in seminary. But ladies and gentlemen, you cannot receive the power of His presence and enter into intimacy to be sent out to redeem your world without being this. Well, okay. Suppose I decide I'm willing to go for that. I'll embrace that. What do I have to do? Where are they, those wolves? Well, they're sitting next to you. Where are those wolves? What do I need to do? Well, look at the verse 16, which gets us into the practicality, the practice of the ministry. Verse 16. Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. Therefore, what I've told you, what I'm going to tell you is based upon what I've already told you. So I've told you you're going to be sheep in the midst of wolves. Based on that, this is cause and effect. Based on that, here's what it's the Greek word genomai, which means created, brought into being. It's a state of being. It's not a doing thing. You're not going to go out and do sheep things. You got this backwards. That's wolves who put on sheep clothing and do sheep stuff. We're going to be sheep. We're not going to do sheepish things. We're going to be sheep. We're not going to do sheep stuff and become sheep. We're going to become sheep who do sheep stuff. That was the parable, people. He comes in all of His greatness, sits on the throne of His glory, brings all of His angels with Him. Divides the sheep on the right hand, goats on the left hand. Dividing up. And says to the sheep, I was hungry, I was naked, I was prison, I was sick, I was, and you did, so you're in. I was goats, I was, and you didn't. So I've got to do, no. Both sheep and the goats looked at Him and said, when were you ever like that? We didn't know that. See, goats were just being goats. Sheep were just being sheep. So if you have to figure out how to do this, you haven't got it. If you need a Saturday seminar to teach you how to love, you got a problem. You haven't got what He's talking about. Because Billy already talked to us about, He's going to make. This is going to be an inside. That's the whole dynamic of what He's taken and planted within us that we're going. And as he gets into the passage, down into the provision, he's going to talk about, oh, you're going to be just like me. Why? Because what I am is in you. And you're going to be a sheep just like I am. You can't help yourself. And when you become a sheep, what are the two characteristics that begin to spill out of you? You will be wise as serpents. Oh, you mean I'm going to be clever? Smart. Learn how to manipulate those wolves when they open their mouth. Oh, learn how to escape. Oh, the wise is not, no, it's not. That's not what he's talking about. The Greek word for wise here is only used 14 times in the New Testament. Paul talked about this. Where are the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputers of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? That's not this word. Doesn't have anything to do with this passage. Different word altogether. So that's not what he's talking about. The idea of wise is sensitivity. It's a relational deal. In my relationships with wolves, I'm to be sensitive to their need. They're hungry. And I'm delicious. And they have a need. And I'm going to meet their need. My dad irritated the life out of me. One thing about him I just absolutely hated. He'd get coffee every morning, which gave him coffee breath. You guys that drink coffee, you have no idea. He had coffee breath, and he slurped that stuff. You could hear him on the other side of the house. Just irritated me to death. I never told him, but I just, for nearly a year, just, should get some manners. Then I found out he was raised in upstate New York, back in the sticks. His dad, my grandpa, was an alcoholic. Died when he was young. He didn't see an inside toilet until he was in college. And here he was, had a college education, a degree from seminary, and had pastored churches for 40 years, and had influenced my life for Jesus. Look where the man came from. And I started saying, slurp your coffee, man. Wow. And I became sensitive to who the man was. See, up to that time, I just, slurping that coffee. But when I got over and began to look at him, come on, if you're going to be wise, sensitive. In teen camps, you're going to run into some stupid, crazy, idiotic nutcases. That's why they come to youth camp. Their parents make them come to get rid of them. And you're going to have to live with them all week. How am I going to be sensitive? Wise. And in every relationship, everyone who crossed my path, if I'm going to be a sheep, I've got to be sensitive to where they are. Who can God give me insight? Could he give me, oh Jesus, give me the spirit of discernment to see where they're hurting and what they need. The second thing he says in verse 16 is be harmless as doves. And harmless does not mean be gentle. It doesn't mean meekness. It doesn't mean any of that. It has to do with unmixed. It's the idea of unmixed. That I'm to be an individual that doesn't have any mixture of love and hate. Sometimes I'm on top, sometimes I'm not. I'm just No, it's this, I'm to be pure, consistent in this constant, unmixed business of being a sheep. This word is only used 3 times in the New Testament. And I'm not to be, sometimes I'm self-sourced, but sometimes I'm loving. Well, on Tuesday night when I go calling, I'm loving. Unmixed. See, what we want for you is for you to enter into such an intimacy with Jesus that there is a consistency in who you are. So when somebody comes to me and says, do you know what they did? I can look at him and say, they didn't do that. You've got it wrong. There's a misunderstanding someplace. Because I know them. And they are. You know what they said? You got to be taking it out of context. Because they know. Now, I'm not sure that's possible for teenagers, young people. No reaction. They just sit there and look at you. I'm not sure that can be done by young married couples with kids. I'm not sure senior adults with arthritis can pull that off. I think maybe the only people that can get that done are sheep who have become sheep because a divine God has transferred himself within them. And they are sourced.